Some generations are defined by a single event, a war, a revolution, a moment in time everyone can point to. But millennials, those born between 1981 and 1996, are defined by something harder to pin down. They are the only generation to have genuinely lived two different worlds, not in different eras, but in the same lifetime, growing up in one reality and quietly finding themselves living in another. Let's go back. Picture a childhood in the late 80s or early 90s. You wake up on a Saturday morning, and there is genuinely nothing pulling at your attention. No notifications, no algorithm deciding what you should watch next. You go outside because that's just what you do. You knock on your friend's door. You don't text them, you don't DM them, you literally show up at their house and hope they're home. If they're not, you go find someone else. You ride your bike until it gets dark. You come home when the streetlights come on because that was the rule. And somehow it worked. Boredom was a real, lived experience. And boredom, psychologists now tell us, is actually where creativity lives, where self-reflection happens, where a kid figures out who they are when no one is watching and no one is performing. Millennial children had that. They had unstructured time, they had physical freedom, they had a social life that existed entirely in the real world, face-to-face, messy, awkward, beautiful, and deeply human. Information was slow. If you wanted to know something, you either asked an adult, went to the library, or waited. News came once a day on television, or in a newspaper your parents read at the kitchen table. The world felt large and a little mysterious. Your neighborhood was your universe, and that felt like enough. Then something started shifting. The late 90s and early 2000s brought the internet into the home. And for millennials, this wasn't something they were handed as children. It was something they watched arrive. They saw the before. They lived the transition. They remember when a phone was just a phone attached to a wall, and then they were the first teenagers to carry one in their pocket. This is the part that defines millennial psychology more than anything else. They weren't born into the digital world like Gen Z was. They migrated into it, consciously. And that migration came with a kind of cognitive dissonance that's hard to put into words. They remembered what it felt like to be unreachable, to not know something instantly, to have a conversation end when you walked away from someone. And then suddenly, all of that changed. Conversations never ended. Information was everywhere. The world shrank overnight. For many millennials, adolescence sat directly on that fault line. They went through some of their most formative years, first relationships, identity formation, social comparison, all of it, in a world that was mid-transformation. Social media arrived just as they were becoming young adults. Facebook launched when the oldest millennials were in their early 20s. By the time the youngest millennials were in high school, social media was already reshaping how people saw themselves and each other. And here's where the psychology gets complicated. Millennials developed their core sense of self in an offline world. Their foundational identity, their earliest memories of who they were, those were built without digital performance. But then, they had to take that self and translate it into an online world that operated on completely different rules. A world where your value could be quantified in likes, where your social life had a public record, where comparison wasn't just natural, it was engineered. Research consistently shows that people who remember a pre-digital life tend to experience a kind of low-level grief for it. Not nostalgia exactly, something more unsettled, like knowing a quieter version of yourself used to exist, and wondering where they went. As millennials moved into adulthood, the world kept shifting beneath their feet. They graduated into a financial crisis. They were the most educated generation in history, and many of them couldn't get jobs that matched that education. They delayed marriage, delayed homeownership, delayed the traditional markers of adulthood, not out of laziness, but because the economic reality didn't allow for it. And then they watched older generations call them entitled for struggling with a system that had fundamentally changed. The world they were promised, work hard, get a degree, buy a house, build a stable life, didn't materialize the way it had for their parents, and yet they still carried the values of that older world inside them, because that's the world they were raised to believe in. That's the quiet psychological tension at the heart of the millennial experience. They were raised with one set of expectations, one kind of world, one rhythm of life, and then they had to live out their adulthood in something almost unrecognizable. They are fluent in both worlds, but fully at home in neither. And maybe that's not a wound. Maybe that's actually a kind of strength, because a person who has lived through real change, who remembers what was and can still navigate what is, carries a perspective that is genuinely rare. Millennials didn't just witness the shift, they absorbed it, both sides of it, and they're still figuring out what that means.
Thanks for watching. If something in this video clicked for you, that's not random. I make videos that help you understand your mind a little better each time. So if you're into that, stick around and consider leaving a like and subscribing. I'll see you in the next one.